Thank you for tuning in. You're now listening to
Deliberately Woke.
We have a lot to talk about.
Let's get into it.
So, something that I think we bonded over and like talk a lot about is mental health. I've shared with you that I'm in therapy. There are a few reasons why I'm there. But it really came about like at a time in my life where I really wanted to move forward with certain things, and I just felt like I couldn't move forward with them, whether it was like something with my career or something in my love life. And therapy has really been like this outlet for me to kind of piece together why I think the way that I do, and tackle things in a way that is a lot easier than I might have like thought at first. And my immediate family, like I've definitely shared this with them. They know this, and their response has been like obviously very supportive.
That's good.
Very supportive, but at the same time it's still something that's very new to my family, and something that we hadn't spoken about before I decided like I needed to do this.
And what made you wait so long? Is it that stigmatism you're talking about?
It definitely a stigma of like feeling like you should be able to deal with things on your own, and or like confide in a close friend or a family member. That was my parents' initial reaction. Oh, you can talk to us, but and obviously that's great, and I'm like very lucky because I know a lot of people don't have that.
Right.
But it's still something we're learning together, and like I want everybody to go to therapy based on
And
my
everyone
positive. Yeah, I mean, I definitely believe that everybody should, especially when we're talking about like communities of color, because we have a lot of trauma that's not just like individual trauma, but trauma that comes from the outside world and totally affects us in different ways.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting you say like now you're in therapy, because I wonder if there's a stigma or fear kind of like in like POC families and communities, and also most like Caribbean families.
Yeah.
It's always like what society will think. Every judgment is like the outside world. And like this issue, mental health and going to therapy, is something like, oh my God, I don't want to be seen as crazy.
Yeah.
Or also kind of like, I don't want to be seen kind of like as ungrateful, because like they're like, you have this, you have that, we didn't have this.
Exactly.
But it should be a part of your overall health.
Yeah.
And I think it's seen as weakness. Like like I was telling you when we were talking about this topic, it's kind of like you get your street cred and you get like your you get your rights to say I've lived if you suffered, but it's like suffering in silence is like noble or honorable in a way. And it's very interesting, and it's weird to navigate. I shared with you too, like as a kid, I had depression, and I went to a child psychologist for years. But it was like my family was supportive of it, obviously, because I was underage and they put me in it. But it wasn't something that we really discussed. And when it came time to do like family sessions, that's when the support wasn't there, or like, oh my God, or why did you say this, or we shouldn't be talking about this. And it's very hard to navigate, and I want to go back to it, but I kind of like have excuses and stuff, and I think it's just that stigmatism that I'm dealing with, but also kind of like, would I ever find a solution? Because my family is supportive to a certain extent, and then it's like, we're not talking about this. So then where do we go from here? Or how do you evolve from it? And also seeing it from the family's perspective, that it's not like judgment or saying they're horrible or like they're going to hell.
But it's
just to like react to it and like kind of process what has happened, especially if you had traumatic childhood experiences or just, family situations. And that's where it's hard to navigate this. So I understand it, but I agree everyone should be in therapy.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting what you say about like this badge of honor of carrying like the trauma with you and like,
and just pushing through and not talking about
through
it.
life, and it doesn't really work like that. I mean, at least for me, I mean, obviously people can get through life, but as far as like, opening your mind to yourself and really learning yourself, like it's extremely valuable. And it's almost like, especially in like, Caribbean and, Black and people of color communities, like, it's almost as if like it's a privilege to think about your mental health, because you were saying like you don't want to seem ungrateful, right?
Right.
And it's like, why is the mind seen as not the most important thing? It's like, if you have your basic needs met, like you have a house, you have, and, you know, obviously, like, you know, we're two educated people. We have 2 degrees, but 4 degrees between the both of us. And like, you know, we've lived a certain life of privilege, right?
Absolutely.
But it's not to say that you shouldn't be taking care of your mental health. And especially within our community, we have suffered like so much trauma through hundreds of years. And when we don't talk about these things, it's crazy because it influences so many things that we do, even the mindset that we don't deserve to think about our minds. Like, and then that's a privilege, you know?
Yeah. And the pessimism, right? We talked about that. I always go to the Caribbean because that's what I know. That's what my family's background is. So, I mean, just that in of itself, the pessimism about everything, you know, like when I made the joke, like, oh, I'm going out tonight. Well, did you know that someone was stabbed here or like robbed the other day? It's kind of like there's like this anxiety inducing kind of feeling, even telling your family positive news, negative news. At least for me, I'm always like anxious and like, oh my God, how are they going to react? How's this one going to react? And I think that deals with like this generational trauma that we really don't talk about, and like it's noble to keep it in and to just push through and just, you know, be, you know, have your outburst or, you know, whatever your vice is, because a lot of these people have vices that you don't understand, or they, you know, they're aggressive or angry. It's because we're not, like, at least me, not taught to process our feelings or react to situations. It's kind of like it's invisible, and like how we deal with it is like pretend it didn't happen. Or like, you know, brush it over.
And even like the way you're saying, we process things, like I know in my family, like people definitely go to the negative first, like, and it definitely is a coping mechanism because you're almost addicted to like the idea, or addicted to like the anxiety. This is, you know, part of what I'm learning about myself. Like I'll create a scenario when it doesn't need to start there. And like that can make it really hard to even have conversations because you don't want to agitate or ruffle feathers with people in your family, because again, you don't want them to think like, I think you're a bad person, or like, I don't like you. It's not that. It's just that we have to be able to talk about this constructively so we can both move on from it. We can all move through it. And like you said, there's so many things, like this idea of like not being seen, like if you don't talk about it. Like how many crazy things have happened in my family, like, you know, extended and wherever, and, you know, people that I know that it's just like, that's insane when you recall like what happened or who did what to who. And because they're a family member, you can't say anything. And we're just going to shut up about it and just be like, oh yeah, that's nuts. And still interact with the person too, and continue to make excuses, which creates a totally unhealthy environment.
Or even saying like, you know, not talking about when someone in your family clearly has some mental health issue or, you know,
or addiction,
or something's going on, and it's like, oh, that's just how they act if they have an outburst or they're aggressive towards you. It's not, we don't talk about like, oh, you know what, maybe we should talk to them, and maybe they should get help, or like see a therapist, and not just be like, oh, that's their behavior. And I find that a lot. And then you're supposed to interact with these people, but then the situations keep happening, and you're still traumatized by it for years, and it's like you don't really know how to talk about it. And why family members, at least in my family, we just don't talk to each other, because it's like there's no tools that we have to talk about what the issues is, and we really don't know what the issues is. And I think it's all of us navigating the traumas that we had, which is different, and like really just like it's like a freaking nuclear bomb when we're all together, and that's what it is, and there's no talking about it. And I guess I am thinking about this now because a lot of people in my family, older people, are getting older and sick, and it's only the younger people are going to be left around, and none of us are really close like
Yeah.
before, and you're like, what is your family gonna be like when like the kind of like the matriarchs of the family, because there's a lot of women in my family, are like gone. Like how
Yeah.
are we gonna interact with each other, because we don't have the tools to interact, and they're all dealing and navigating their own trauma.
Yeah.
And like so it's like we either need a family therapist or this family will
Well,
dissolve.
I mean, I think about this too, especially since I mean, I don't have many siblings. All of my cousins were either in sets of 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And, and beyond that, I mean, I have, extended family.
Yeah.
And I was talking to one of my cousins about this, and it's like, what's going to happen afterwards, like you said, because,
Yeah.
and if we had those tools, I think it would be easier, like therapy serving as a tool to be able to speak the same language or get on the same track and understanding of each other.
No, I agree. And that's exactly where I'm at now. And then some of it is, I mean, it's just, it is historical too, I think is a really important part, and I think that there is something to say about the trauma of slavery and just the
Absolutely.
trauma of colonialism and everything, because, and like my family, like we were talking about, like finding out stories of trauma, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
elders in your family have had years later, and it's just like casually said and then never spoken again. And you're like, okay, I know this happened and you've moved on and you're strong
But
as
not
hell.
really.
But me, I need to
Yeah.
process this and be
Yeah.
like, oh my God, and why are we still interacting with this person
And
and,
also,
so
I
forth.
hate that it's just brought up casually.
Yeah,
This has
it
happened
is.
to, it's like, oh yeah, so and so, and it's like, wait, what?
What? Yeah.
Nobody did anything about this, or like worse when you're like, I don't want to talk to this person, and they're like, no, like
Their
just,
family.
yeah, their family, like
That's
don't
the
say
answer for
anything
everything.
about it.
It's like it's family, and and it's like, no. Sometimes families do things that are not acceptable, or things that are traumatic, and it's okay
Yeah.
to like disengage from that and separate from that. And that's hard for my family, as I've done for half of my family. I've disengaged from
It's
them,
hard.
and it's hard. But like that's what I would do for my own. I know I'm sane enough to be like, you know what? Let me not engage with that. And
Yeah.
it's hard, but I would love to like get to the bottom of stuff, or
Yeah.
like, do a family therapy session or something. But it's like it don't, like in my family, I feel like they'll get to stage 1 and then
They'll be like, we did it, and
but
then bye.
but then stage 2, like when it's like confronting the actual issue, or like getting to the root of things, it's like, oh my God, we're
Yeah.
not touching that with a 10-foot pole.
I mean, I think that there are, unfortunately, it's like other traumatic events that happen, or like instances of pain or grief that bring people to the conclusion that maybe they should seek some type of help.
Yeah.
And like it's obviously better late than never, but like I do want to create like an environment where people are more comfortable, and that's why you talk to somebody else. It doesn't have to be, your immediate family to talk about these issues, but you'd be better off. But I do want to go back to your point about, trauma being passed down to generations, but through generations. And there's this theory or syndrome that was created by this woman named Dr. Joy DeGruy called post-traumatic slave syndrome. And it's basically about how trauma can be passed down intergenerationally. And specifically, we're talking about anybody who's been an enslaved person in the Americas. And it's interesting because there's actually like emerging research now that suggests that there might be an actual like, trauma gene in our DNA that is
like
passed
genetically
down.
modified,
right?
that's the trauma.
And I don't doubt that.
Yeah.
I definitely don't doubt that, especially since I mean, I'm not a scientist. It's not
Of
the same thing,
course.
but like mental illness can be hereditary,
Of
and
course.
it it makes sense that something that our ancestors survived, we could go through too. I mean, it's been hundreds of years that we've been going through this, and I mean, especially within Caribbean families, like this like influences like how we feel about ourselves. I mean, we've touched on colorism before, and just the attitude that we have towards each other too.
Yeah.
Even like not even empathizing with one another, when we're going through something.
But also being negative. Imagine how slavery,
Absolutely.
colonialism
And
separated families.
Oh, well,
I mean,
exactly. And what that does to a person too, in terms of like feeling abandoned and, what you
Feeling lost,
feeling
no
lost, maybe
sense of community,
what you have to live for.
culture.
Exactly, like being definitely separated from your culture, and then the trauma is reinforced because we know things haven't, haven't changed to that degree, that everything's honky-dory, everybody can treat themselves mentally from what they go through with their families,
Exactly.
individually, and then this, kind of overarching issue that we have, overarching trauma that we have.
Yeah, and also like some of the the mixed kids and all that, and all the women that and that's the like kind of going back to the narrative discussion about like them saying that they were good slave owners, and ones that were good, and like Thomas Jefferson having children with one of his slaves, right? That being kind of like an anecdotal thing,
or
and it's
saying
like
having children instead of like raped.
exactly, but like that trauma too, and then that like kind of, I mean, race is a social construct, but that new race that they created, and how like even that trauma, like they have tons of books, like sociologists have written about like the mixed kids, the ones that were passable and like became white, and then the ones that weren't. Imagine like that kind of trauma,
and
being
living
separate
and
from your
also,
family,
like having a double identity,
exactly, and not being accepted in either group, because and it kind of like those mixed kids are kind of like dealing with the racial issues too a lot, and it's still to this day when you're navigating two cultures.
But also like, and this is obviously not every mixed person, but this idea of being better than, and like having the features of, or like holding those features up that make you closer to quote unquote whiteness.
And a lot of it, even if they don't want to, you're conditioned, right? Because about how you look,
you're
or how your hair,
these
even if you're a mixed person and you're not. But like those type of things, I think, are going back to what you're talking about, this generational trauma.
Yeah.
Because that exists. Colorism is a part of the generational trauma, and the result of the trauma from slavery and colonialism.
And even the way, like, I mean, I might catch slack for this, but like the way that we discipline our children. I mean, this definitely, like the beatings and like just honestly abuse of children, like comes from the beatings that we endured during slavery.
I mean, it's also they want us to behave properly because of the trauma that they've dealt with, the violence from the state as well.
Absolutely, I'm not saying it's just
but I agree with you.
But it comes from that, like, and also it's all based. It comes from that fear.
Exactly, and also the when you talk about the parenting, also like growing up, that was I went to a very white school, and like interacting and going to white people's houses and seeing how kids had more authority in like like what you want to eat for, like these are questions that I didn't, not that I'm saying that it was I lived in a prison, but I'm saying like there was no questions on like what I wanted to eat, or like if I didn't want it, you had to finish your food, like even if you didn't like it, like these type of things that it's like in when I used to go to my white friend's house, it was like that, or they would go in the room and shut the door and like, leave me alone, mom. I never could do stuff like that. So even that, but I think the way they parent, I think, is also that generational trauma, and like trying to make sure that we behave properly. Again, that societal thing, like always being conscious of what you're, or throwing tantrums in the
oh no, I would never do that.
in the mall or something.
I would never do that.
And like it was just one look or a pinch or something, like I was terrified. But I feel like it's those type of things that show up, and you can see the historical difference, and just the kind of like how we learn to react or deal with trauma that might have been from our grandparents or great grandparents, or
I mean,
our
this
communities
also
overall.
says a lot about how we learn to react to other people's actions too, because I'm thinking of like white kids being able to throw tantrums, or like having this like autonomy with their parents over themselves, and being able to choose certain things, and then this narrative of them that's painted when one of them that's like 18 or under does something that's atrocious and horrible. It's like, oh well, we have to like make an
benefit
excuse
of
for
the
them.
doubt
and
for them.
they've been allowed to act this way their entire lives from their birth. And it's not to say that like I think there's a fine line between like how you discipline your child and what's negative and what's not. Like there are some parents, I'm sure, who are great, who like ask their kids, hey, what would you like to have? What I mean? And that's the way that they choose to raise their children. You know what I mean? But like, it's the abuse side of things, like, and not even recognizing that it's abuse too, because I'm sure like most, I'm not going to say most parents, but parents love their kids, you know what I mean? But it's like almost like I'm doing this because I love you. And like back to your point of like, you better behave, like you will be seen this way. So you have to be disciplined and you have to march in line and do what I say.
Or an experience or a racial experience that they had, right? Out in public. And then they come home and they're like, okay, I'm going to, like, you can't do this behavior. So I'm going to, like, beat it into you to not do this.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to not being able to even say those things.
Yeah.
You know?
Not being and process it properly with the right tools and get your kid to understand something. Like, because it's very real.
Or explaining it in a way that's, like, that's something I found very interesting when I started hanging around white friends, like little kids, you know, and at the time I didn't, but as I got older, like the dialogue is different. And of course, I'm not generalizing, not all white parents, but there's dialogue with white parents and kids and like explaining things a little more. And like, I guess, again, with the tools not being able to express, so at least my family, there was really no explanation for
but
things.
But it's also like passed down too. Like, just do this. Like, it's like,
you're the child,
you're gonna
it's supposed to be seen and not heard. That was always embedded in my head. Yeah. And if there was adults like having a party, you needed to be in the room. And if you came out and were nosy, you were going to get hit. Yeah. And that was just it. And it's not to say it was bad or that it was abuse. I mean, it is some of it. But it's those things I found really interesting as I got older and started seeing like, oh, wow. And of course, as we become generational and like kind of like, you know, grow up in the U.S., we change our ways and we have what we would do with our kids. Yeah. But I also see sometimes when I see kids on the train,
like,
I revert back to like, oh my God, this child needs some tough parenting.
Yeah, some type of corporal punishment.
You know,
is needed. No.
But it's interesting.
I mean, we were all when I personally growing up, like my parents, that was my form of punishment, was over explaining things to me. I would get lectures and be like crying at the end, like, can this please be over?
That's good though.
Yeah, no, I mean, I
would have preferred that.
Yeah, I definitely preferred that. I don't know how I personally, but it would have been different because I would be raised in it, but I don't know how I'd feel about my parents, especially my father, like hitting me and what that might, how I might react, especially like there's levels to this too.
Course.
Like, you know, some people just get smacked and it's like, go on or whatever. Some people get beat with belts and, you know,
chancletas.
Yeah, or whatever, whatever's around.
Whatever's around, yeah.
But I mean, I have to think, I think that, you know, I think that we have to keep talking about these things. And I think that there's this younger generation of people are starting to think about themselves and their mental health, their well-being, and themselves as an individual. It took me a while, like, to really think of myself as, you know, Ariel, who's like not alone in the world, but like has to navigate this world and like do things on her own and like make real decisions. In so many different aspects of life. And I think that this younger generation is more aware of that, like younger, I think, is what I seem to see. You know, I'm thinking about Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka, who've pulled out of competitions based on their mental health. Now, Simone Biles is a little like, you know, they said it was mental and it's actually like this condition. I just want to touch on this because I feel like I want to give her a shout out. I'm so happy for her that she decided to pull out of the Olympics to preserve her mental health, or she knew that she couldn't go on with this. There's like this phenomenon that happens to gymnasts in the air called twisties, where you lose control of your body and you can't do anything. Like, she landed because she's an outstanding professional athlete, but it's mental gymnastics. And there have been a slew of gymnasts who have come, you know, in support of her, saying like sometimes when this happens to you, it's very hard to like feel like you're going to be able to land again, and you can injure yourself, you can harm yourself. And she decided to pull out of the competition, even though this is like obviously devastating for her. Of course she would want to compete. And I find it interesting, like the response that she's been getting from a lot of just terrible trash white men.
Of course.
And you know, one of the chief trash people, I won't even say his garbage name, but like this idea that you're supposed to just perform and dance or do whatever, literally flip around just for people's entertainment.
For white people's entertainment.
Right.
And you're black. And that's what you're supposed to do.
And like, even this idea that they have about black bodies being stronger and being able to
like
withstand superhuman and just constantly using for their benefit. And I'm very happy that there's this movement amongst young black people to preserve their mental health, because the world will chew you up and spit you out.
Yeah.
She drop out of competition and people will be pissed off this week, and next week it's on to the next week. And if she were to continue, I'd be like, oh my God, she's such a hero. She broke her back for us.
Exactly. Because that resilience, right? And the suffering.
And exactly. It's almost like it's put
people
on
of color
still.
Supposed to suffer.
Absolutely.
That's it. We're used to it, and
Absolutely.
we're like genetically, we genetically are just predisposed to it. Instead of saying no, it's the fucking systems that you created that make us suffer like this. And that's what I wasn't keeping up with the story, but I saw some of the memes, and that was what I was that narrative, like these, really like these white guys that are really into sports, and that whole nationalism that is with the Olympics, which I don't really watch it, but like that whole thing, and like saying how dare she, and she's like representing the country, and it's like, are we serious right now? Like like, come on, and it's just that narrative that you're like supposed to perform for them. We're here for their amusement. Yeah, that's at the bottom line in every form
just
of the word.
Just the entertainment, like dance, do this,
exactly.
Look around, do this when I say,
exactly,
when I want to see it. And so no, don't suffer in silence. I'm so happy that these young women are taking a stance for themselves. Same with Naomi Osaka. I mean, she decided to pull out of these competitions. I'm not a tennis aficionado, so I don't know
either.
if it was Wimbledon or the French Open or whatever. A few of these, and even the Olympics, she decided to pull out of to preserve her mental health. And people have the nerve to be like, "Oh well, she was on the cover of Vogue. Is she really like sick? How dare you impose your idea of what being well is onto somebody else?" It's totally insane, but it is definitely racist.
Of course.
It's only racist. That's what it comes from.
Yeah.
And it's, I'm sure there's sexism piled onto there
of course.
And just, I go back to Simone Biles, what she endured and what she went through, with, the abuse from this doctor and having to, or deciding to tell everyone publicly. That's a lot of stress in and of itself, because you're judged. I mean, I understand that, like having to stand in your truth and be bare and vulnerable for people to see.
And people are assholes.
Yeah.
I mean,
like, at the end of the day, they're assholes, which is why you have to take care of your mind.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that, it's a good discussion to have, and I think it's a great that we are talking about and being open about it. I think we should definitely check our mental health, and not be ashamed of it.
No.
And also talk to our family and friends about it casually, and from a place of just like, listen, I'm just taking care of me and I want to talk things out. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And there are different forms of therapy too. There's even like, community therapy. You may not, and that's another thing we didn't touch on, but like how expensive it can be to treat your mind and talk to somebody. But there are different resources if you're interested.
Yeah, definitely. Or the arts, or however you want to express writing. That was something that was really big for me in high school, writing poetry and stories. So it's just important to check your mental health, and I hope everyone does it. And yeah, it was a great conversation. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you all for listening and supporting us. So please be sure to follow and subscribe to us on social media, and look out for new episodes every Thursday.
Thank you, guys.